Hello, my name is Joe Devaux.
It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Devaux. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Tacoma, Washington on January 8, 1924.
So that makes you how old right now?
Right now I'm 99 and a half. I hope to get 100 on January 8th, 2024.
I'm sure you'll make it. What's it like to be 99 and a half?
It's been very good until the last few weeks, where I've developed pneumonia and a couple other sicknesses, but when you get to be my age, you start slowly sinking away.
Fortunately, you have all your faculties and you're a very friendly person. That's what I've gathered. I've spoken to you a few times and it's nice to see how friendly you are.
Well, thank you.
Could you please tell me a little bit about your childhood? You mentioned you were born in Tacoma.
Well, we were born during the Depression days, and it was very tough to make a living in those days. My father was a gas station operator, and he worked 6.5 days a week, and it was just very, very difficult to get a job. Until the war started in 1939, that's when the shipyards started opening up and jobs became plentiful. But those early years, I didn't really know much about what was going on. I was given my 3 meals a day, and I was treated good, and I was happy. I was a baseball nut. I went to every baseball game I could go to. I had a happy childhood, I think.
Could you tell us, did you have any brothers or sisters?
No, I'm an only child.
And tell me more about the Great Depression. When you looked out in your community in Tacoma, what were some of the things that you saw that made you realize there was a Great Depression going on?
Well, money was the big problem. Nobody had much money. I can recall buying at a local bakery, you could buy all the buttermilk you could drink for 10 cents. Huge milkshakes were 10 cents. You could buy all kinds of pastries for a nickel, but nobody had much money. But fortunately, my dad always gave me a small allowance, so I had enough to keep me filled up with all these inexpensive goodies.
Could you tell us, when you were a child and you and your buddies would get together, what kind of things did you do for fun?
Well, we played marbles a lot in those days. They don't do that much more, but we played marbles and we played hockey out in the street. We all had beat up hockey sticks, and we'd try to play at night until the lights came on. We were always outside. We weren't inside kids. We were always outside getting our exercise, and I think that was much better then than it is today.
Could you please tell me, sir, before the war broke out, what was your plan? What was your dream? What were you going to do with your life?
I really didn't have any idea what I wanted to do. I just played it by ear. I didn't have any particular design to be anything. Just a kid having fun. Well, actually, I did have a job. I was delivering groceries for 50 cents a day. And that was about all I ever did. When the war came, I was in junior high school. I had never heard of a Pearl Harbor. I didn't know where it was. And when the war started, I was completely unaware of what was going on in the world.
Tell us about the actual attack. How did you hear about it on, December 7th, 1940?
Yeah, December 7th, I was in an ice cream parlor, and The announcement came through around 9 o'clock in the morning, and I ran home and told my folks the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. I didn't know where it was, but my mother and dad knew, and they told me, well, we're going to have a problem. We think we can beat those guys in about a month because all they can do is make small 10-cent toys. But we were certainly wrong about that. It took 5 years.
You know, in this part of the country, there was a lot of Japanese Americans.
That was a very, very bad deal. I had some Japanese friends, and I was very, very upset. The mayor of Tacoma, he was against it entirely. It was a bad crime on a part of our government. I think it was terrible.
You're talking about the internment.
Yeah, taking the Japanese off the West Coast, putting them in the concentration camps.
What did you witness of that?
Well, I saw what happened, and I was just very upset.
Did you see them actually taking the families out of the homes, or did you see any of the Japanese Americans being relocated?
Yeah, they were taken off Bainbridge Island and taken down to the armory in Tacoma and put on buses, and off they went. I didn't know where they were going, but they disappeared fast. That was an Executive Order 9066 signed by the President.
Could you please tell me, after Pearl Harbor, what do you remember about the surge of patriotism? Did all these young men try to join the service, right after the attack?
I was 17 years old at the time of the attack, so I wasn't too interested in signing up because I was still in high school. And I got a letter from the president. It said, "Greetings, we want you to serve in our country, in our armed forces." Well, I went down to the draft board and talked to a couple gentlemen, and they said, "How are you doing in school?" I said, "I'm doing okay." When do you graduate?" I said, "June of '43. "Well, we'll give you a 6-month deferment so you can get your high school diploma, and then you'll go right into the Army." So that's how it worked. On June of '43, I was drafted into the Army. We went to Fort Lewis, Washington for 3 or 4 days, and then we headed south to Camp Roberts, California, which is halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco. We went there for our basic training of 17 weeks. Fortunately, my SAT score was a little above average, so I was offered a job in headquarters company, which sounded pretty good to me. So I accepted that job, and for 11 months, I had a really good job. I could come and go as I pleased, anytime between 4:30 Friday night and 7 o'clock Monday morning. I was free, and a bunch of us hitchhiked up and down the coast and visited all these small towns, and it was just really nice. But then the time came when they needed more troops, and so I was replaced by someone with limited service. Maybe they had punctured eardrums, I don't know, but I was given the notice that I was to be shipped overseas. Well, everybody in the West Coast was shipped to the South Pacific, and I didn't want to go to the South Pacific. I didn't like the idea of fighting Japanese, malaria, all those bad diseases, so I wanted to go to Europe. Well, I had a friend in headquarters company, and I asked him, "How can I get to Europe?" He said, "Well, I can put you on a shipment to Europe for 2 bottles of scotch." So I agreed, and I was shipped off to Fort Meade, Maryland, and I had 30 days to get there. So I came home from Tacoma to Tacoma for 2 weeks, and then I took a train back to Fort Meade, Maryland, in preparation for shipment overseas.
You're doing incredible. Please continue.
The basic training, of course, is 17 weeks, and you learn discipline. You learn how to take orders. As long as you follow orders, you'll have no problem. There were a few who didn't like to follow orders, but they paid for it by doing additional KP duties, kitchen police, that is. But you just have to keep your mouth shut and take orders and do what you're told.
Can you please tell me about some of the physical regimen of training? When you were training, how did they get you guys in shape?
We had exercises every morning out on the parade ground, and we had a lot of 4 and 5 mile hikes to get us in good physical shape. The last hike was a 20-mile hike with full equipment, and I missed that hike because I was on KP duty. So I was so happy not to have to make that hike. But at the end of our training, they had a list of those who had not taken the 20-mile hike, and I was on the list, so I had to take that 20-mile hike, and my feet were pretty red and raw when I got back.
So after your training, take us through, how do you get overseas, sir?
Well, we were in Fort Meade, Maryland, and we got on a ship on a cold November rainy day, and it was very cold and the water was rough. And we boarded a ship. We were in a convoy. The water was so bad that you could look out and see boats, then you look out again and they're gone. The waves were so high, and I got deathly seasick. I never ate a bite of food for about 6-7 days. It was horrible. The third day out, I don't know why, but we had pork and beans for breakfast, and that did it. That really upset me. We finally made it into England, and I swore I'd never come back to this country if I had to go through that again. But luckily, we came back in mid-July, and the weather was really nice and the ocean was calm, so I did come back. But as soon as we got to England, we got on a train. We landed at Liverpool and got on a train and went to Southampton. Then we got on a boat and went across the channel, landed in Le Havre, France. And we got on boxcars and went into Belgium. Well, my name Devaux is a Belgian name. My grandparents came from Belgium. But I couldn't speak French, unfortunately, so that didn't do me any good. Then we arrived in Holland. That's where I joined. That's where I had my first military experience. Actually, I got tangled up with the Battle of the Bulge because I was in a replacement depot waiting for assignment when the Germans broke through on December 16th. And I was not assigned to any place. I was in a replacement depot, so we were all upset, didn't know what to do. Everybody was fleeing west to get away from the Germans, and I was put in a temporary outfit called Snafu, Situation Normal, all fired up. And so we were given guns and told to just dig in and hold your fire, just dig in and wait. Well, that's where I spent my first 2 nights in foxholes. Finally, my records were found, and I was sent to the 104th Division. They were stationed on the Roer River, R-O-E-R. We were stationed there for about 3 weeks. So other than going on patrols at night, which I didn't have to do because I was assigned as a machine gunner, when I joined the outfit, my first sergeant was 37 years old, and I was 20. And he said, we need machine gunners. And I said, well, wait a minute. I was trained as a rifleman. I don't know much about machine guns. He said, don't worry, we'll teach you. So you go where they tell you to go, whether you like it or not. So I was assigned to a machine gun squad. You start out carrying ammunition for the 2 machine gunners. There's a second gunner who carries the gun, and the first gunner carries the tripod. And they have 2 ammunition carriers, each one carrying 250 rounds of ammo. So that's how I got assigned as a machine gunner.
You're doing great. Please keep going.
Thank you. There were certain times when we were under fire, and I was sent back to the rear to get some ammo. And as I was crawling along the woods, I hear somebody say, what's the password? I had no idea what the password was. So I just hollered out, GI, government insurance. And they wanted to know, what do you want? I said, we need some ammo. And they finally gave me 2 boxes of ammo, and I got them back to where we needed them. One particular night was rather extreme. It was cold and snowy, and 2 of us were in a foxhole, the first gunner and the second gunner. And it was terrible weather, and I found a wooden door from the barn, and I put it over half of the foxhole to try to keep a little cover while we took turns sleeping. It was my turn to take a short nap. So I'm lying there, half asleep, and all of a sudden, my buddy lets go with the round, and I jumped up and hit my head on the door and almost knocked me out. I said, what's going on? He said, something moved. Well, we waited until first light, and it was a cow. We had shadowed that cow pretty well. And those kind of experiences are humorous in some ways, but it's no fun being in a foxhole with nobody in front of you but the enemy. And I think that's where the term, there are no atheists in foxholes. When you're all alone in a foxhole, you talk to God. He may not hear you, but the relief you get by talking seems to calm you down. But the worst thing about it is those cigarettes. They gave us a lot of cigarettes free, and I smoked for 40 years, and I'm paying dearly for it now with COPD. I can hardly breathe at times, as you can probably tell, all because I got those free coffin nails, which I call cigarettes. They were bad for everybody, but that's the way it worked.
It looks like God heard your prayers because you're still here.
Yes, I was very fortunate. The most thing I'm proud of is the combat infantry badge. That's the blue rifle. That is given to all those who serve in actual combat, and that goes to top of all the other medals that you earn. Now, the other forces have their own medals, like the Air Force and the paratroopers, but as far as the infantry goes, we are proud of that combat badge.
And tell me, Mr. Devaux, about your first experience engaging the Germans, please.
Well, there are two types of German soldiers. There's the Wehrmacht, which is like the American GIs, and there's the SS troops. The SS troops are the bad guys. We never took too many prisoners on the SS group, but the Wehrmacht were guys like us, and we didn't really want to kill them all. I have to tell you a story that happened in April of '45. The sun came out finally in March or April after a terribly cold winter, and I was leaning up against a barn trying to get a little warmth and a little snooze, and I heard a noise, and there were two German soldiers standing in front of me with rifles. And I thought to myself, oh boy, it's over for me. Well, one of them said, "Kamerad," and I knew that means surrender. So for some strange reason, I got up and I shook hands with both of them. They were Wehrmacht soldiers, not SS. And I asked them if they had any weapons. We're always looking for pistols. They said 9. And then I asked them if they had any kinder, any children. And one of them said yes. And I said, well, war kaput. You go home soon. I don't know whether they understood me or not, but I asked them if they were hungry. And they said yes. So I gave them a K ration and took them back to the captain. And he sent them to the POW camp. But before that happened, I took one of their rifles and I slammed it down on the ground and broke the stock and threw it aside. I took the other guy's rifle and I slammed it down and it went off between my legs. Scared me to death. I was shaking all over. A couple of my buddies said, "What the hell's going on?" I said, "Oh, nothing." I was so embarrassed. That was a very embarrassing situation. Another time, my sergeant said, "Joe, take that house." Well, generally, when you take a house, you kick open the door and throw in a grenade and holler, "Arrest him! Come out." I don't know why, but I did not throw the grenade in. I kicked the door open, and I saw a light down the hall, a candle light. And I kind of sneaked down there, opened the door, and apparently some old man had passed away, and there were 4 or 5 people around the bed crying. And I just turned around real quietly and snuck away, told my sergeant, "The house is clear," but I didn't. That was really scary. I didn't know what to do. These things happen, and you have to make a quick decision. And I just felt that I didn't want to cause any extra deaths with the grenade, so I didn't throw it in. But
thank you for sharing that. Could you please tell me about some of the times that you remember firing at the Germans?
well, yes, you fire your machine gun. People have asked me many times, "You kill anybody with your machine gun?" Well, I don't like that question because we don't really know. When you fire your machine gun, people hit the dirt. And you don't know whether you hit them or not. In many cases you do, but you don't always know. When you fire a machine gun, everybody flops down automatically. So it's really hard to say how many, if any, I've killed. I'm sure there's plenty. I know one time we were being heavily bombarded with artillery, and we were dug in pretty well. And one person a few feet from me got a direct hit, and I ended up with half his foot on top of me. And that was very frightening, see that foot coming in. So he had an immediate kill, no problem. He was right quick. I've seen a lot of people die from over drinking gasoline fluid from the V2 bombs. Some guys will drink anything. And one time I saw 4 or 5 guys dead with blankets over them. And I asked, what happened to those guys? He said, well, they were drinking V2 fluid, and it killed them. I mean, and on VE Day, I think we lost more people than we did the week before. People celebrating by shooting their rifles up and throwing grenades up. I mean, there was young, happy, half of them were drunk. They were celebrating, and it's just amazing. It was very scary. I held a machine gun straight up in the air, fired 250 rounds. I don't know where they landed, but the bullets were pretty well spent when they came down. But those are some of the experiences we had. My sergeant and I were good friends. I invited him to Seattle in 1962 to the World's Fair, and he came, and we had 5 days of rehashing the war. And he was just a fine, fine gentleman. He and I were in a factory, sleeping on a concrete floor, and we were continually being shelled by some mortar on the hill up above. And he said, I want to get that mortar guy. I said, well, I'll go with you. I don't know why I said that. Anyway, we started climbing up the hill, and we got about maybe 100 feet from where the mortar position was. And he said, I'm hit. Well, where? I said. He said, my neck. Well, he had a piece of shrapnel just nick his neck. It wasn't fatal, but it hurt. So we abandoned the project. So we didn't get the guy on the hill, but we tried. There's lots of experiences like that. Another time, we were going through a patch of woods, and they said, dig in, we're going to settle here for the night. So I was digging away, and I heard a burst of a semi-machine gun. And what had happened, one of my buddies, there were still Germans in the woods, and we didn't know that. So one of my buddies let go. He had his eye on me, the German did, and my buddy let go and killed him before he got a beat on me. So I owe him a lot. We have a lot of very comradeship. It's like the band of brothers. We love each other. We'll die for each other. No kidding. We had some wonderful guys. I kept track of about 30 of them via email after the war. Now they've all passed away. But when you get to be 99, that's the way it goes. The happiest day of my life was VJ Day. After we came home from Europe, we were given 30 days furlough. They called it R&R, rest and recuperation. So I came back to Tacoma for a couple of weeks. Then I had to go down to San Luis Obispo for more training to go to Japan. Well, we weren't very happy about that. We felt we did our duty in Europe, but you go where the Army tells you. Well, while we were there, of course, the atom bomb was dropped and the war ended, and that was really very happy. So I hitchhiked up to Camp Roberts, where I had spent 11 months, and was treated royally by my old buddies, and that was a very happy day for me. We hitchhiked everywhere during the basic training. We never had to worry about getting a ride. we found a car in a barn in Germany, and we drove it around the barnyard until we ran out of gas. Then we run it under the river. People do crazy things when you're young, but that's war. I'm trying to think of another 2 or 3 other incidents that might be of interest, but my mind is getting a little bit older.
That's okay. That's why I'm here.
My vision is slipping. I can't read the newspaper anymore as of about 2 weeks ago. I'm having difficulty breathing. I was in the hospital with pneumonia 10 days ago, but I'm home now. I'm happy. I got a wonderful wife. We've been married 75 years, come 4 days from now, July 9th. That's a very happy time. I was very lucky. When I came home from the war, all I wanted to do was get a job, raise a family, forget the war. I never talked to my children about the war. I never talked to anybody at work about the war. I worked 2 jobs for 20 years, trying to make enough to pay all the bills. So the war was forgotten. And after I retired, I worked for the city of Seattle for 36 years. As of today, I've been retired 42 years, longer than I worked. Somehow, somebody found my address and invited me to a reunion of the 104th Infantry Division. So I went, and I had a great time sitting around talking about some of our experiences. Our company commander was a great fellow. He was only 5'4", and we called him Short Round. And he sent me a Christmas card. Now there's 300 or 450 in a company, so he didn't send it to everybody. But he sent me a card, and I got a copy of it. He said, "You were a good soldier, Joe. You never gave me any crap, and you're an honor to have you in my company." That really cheered me up. That made me so happy. You just got to learn to follow orders. The worst part in combat is you don't know what's going on around you. You don't have any idea. 1,000 feet away, no one tells you. We were going through an open field. All of a sudden, a flare came up, bright as day. The word came out, "Stay in the single line. The field is mine." Well, here comes the strafing of the airplane. The bullets are coming down, and they're hitting guys. And you hear the holler, "Medic, medic, help, help." Some of the guys ran off the path and got killed because of mines. And then the flare goes out, and it's pitch black dark again. It's scary. And one other time, we were having breakfast in our little camp, in our little farmyard. And all of a sudden, we were strafed. And it was amazing. It was the first German jet. And they came in like that. We didn't know what it was. They were really powerful. We didn't have anything at that time. But those German jets were terrific. The Germans had a lot better equipment than we did. I got home with 3 guns. I sold 2, and I kept 1, which is called a Walther PPK. It's a nice little 30 millimeter gun. Right now, I gave it to my son because he's had some problems with neighbors. But I got a permit from the government to bring that back into the States.
You're doing great, Mr. Devaux. You have an incredible memory. Could you please tell me, when you were in combat, Did you have any experiences with German tanks?
No, not very much. We were upset with the tanks because they wouldn't come into a city until the infantry went in first, and that irritated us. The tanks had a tough job. Believe me, it wasn't easy. I've seen 3 or 4 tanks destroyed by 88s. The German 88 military guns were the best you could possibly get. And they were used not only for anti-tank weapons, but they were used on personnel. They were used just to fire on personnel. Very, very scary.
Did you see that happen?
I've seen several tanks destroyed by the 88s. Yeah, in 88. Our tanks were not too good constructed at the beginning of the war. Yeah.
Could you please tell me about some other close calls you had when you were fighting the Germans? Tell us about some other close calls, sir.
Well, there's lots of close calls. We were going to try to take a town on the Weser River on April 8th. I was in the 104th Infantry Division, which was called the Night Fighting Division. It was our purpose to try to take our objective before dawn. So we would take off or jump off, maybe at midnight, and try to get our objective by dawn. The Germans thought that was unfair because we fought at night. But it worked. We did remarkably well. The big trouble was keeping in contact with each other. We didn't use those little clickers they used in some of the movies. We had passwords. The Germans could not pronounce the word F very well, so our passwords were usually contained the word F: friends, foul, favor, fever, words with the letter F. They pronounced the F as Z, Z. So they had trouble with our passwords.
And you were telling me about April 8th.
Oh, yeah. We were trying to get to this first town, and we were in a culvert. It was just before dawn. I would say 3 o'clock in the morning. We had to run from the culvert to the first house. Well, we took the first house. There was about 10 of us. We got into the house, settled down. The word came out, the town's full of Jerry's. We got to get the hell out of here. So we had to backtrack and go back out and into the culvert and wait until daylight. Well, that was a mistake. The next morning, we tried to take the first house in daylight, and my lieutenant, who was in charge of the mortars and machine guns, had a radio, and he was right in front of us, and a sniper got him right in the neck, and I was right behind him. He got killed instantly, and I was right behind him, and I heard the bullets whizzing by me. They missed me. I got into the house. We eventually took the town, and we captured that sniper. And I don't really want to go into too much detail, but we had 50 black soldiers who volunteered from the driving in the trucks. They were called the Red Ball Express, and they were delivering material from the coast clear up to the front lines. Tough job. And there were several hundred who wanted to get out of that and go into an infantry division. Well, Company G took 50. We took 50. And one of them was awarded the Medal of Honor some years after the war because President Clinton felt that there wasn't enough minorities who had received the medal, and so he made a search, and he found one in our outfit, that he thought should get it. We didn't know who. We didn't know the man. He was only with us for a month. But anyway, they caught the sniper. And he was a typical SS, blonde hair, blue eye, Aryan, SS. He wasn't going to live long, we knew that. So we made him dig a hole. And we pushed him in the hole, started covering him up. One of the guys said, "Hey, this is too easy. He's still breathing." So they dug him up and shot him and then covered him up. But that's what you do sometimes. You're not thinking too clear. You want to get that guy. He killed your lieutenant, and you're mad. You're angry, and that was.
So just so we're clear, they captured the sniper, and then they dug a hole.
Yeah.
And
threw him in the hole.
While he was still alive.
Oh yeah, started to cover him up. And he was sputtering and spitting, and one of the guys said, "Hey, this is too easy on him." So they pulled some of the dirt back, shot him, and then they covered him up. So.
What was that like for you to see?
I didn't mind. I was sort of happy with the deal. Probably the worst thing I saw over there was the liberation of a concentration camp at a town near Nordhausen. There was approximately 5,000 dead bodies. Maybe 1,000 still alive, but they were skin and bone. And as we went through there, we were told, "Don't feed them. Let the medics take care of them. If you feed them, they'll die." Some of them were skin and bones. I've lost a lot of weight recently. I'm only 98 pounds. I used to weigh 150, but because of my illness, I've lost my appetite, and I can't eat much. But these guys were really bad shape, and we managed to try to keep them alive. You can look at all the pictures you want of the Holocaust, but unless you're there and see the sight and the smell, the burnt flesh, the ovens, terrible. I didn't sleep for a week. That was really bad. That was the worst thing I saw. And there were several hundred POW camps. Some of the big ones were, Dachau, and you've read about a lot of them. But this was a small one. And unfortunately, our Air Force killed about 1,000 of them because they thought that was the barracks for some of the German soldiers. So they bombed the POW barracks, and unfortunately, they probably killed a fourth of the prisoners. But that happened a lot during the war. So that's.
Thank you for sharing that. When you went into that concentration camp, how many days had it already been liberated?
We were only there one day.
But were you there when it was liberated or right after they liberated?
The day it was liberated.
So were you the first ones in?
Well, yeah. There was a tank outfit that was ahead of us, and we were right behind them. And General Eisenhower made a proclamation. He wanted all troops within 100 miles to see this concentration camp. I'm not sure he got his wish, but that was his idea, was to have all service members within 100 miles to visit that site to see the horrible things that happened. Everybody loved Eisenhower. Nobody loved MacArthur. That's another story.
Could you tell me more about the concentration camp? Put me in your shoes. As you walk in, what do you see? What do you remember about the people who came up to you?
Well, I just saw the bodies lying there in piles. The Germans didn't really care about how they were treated. They just threw them in piles There's a picture in my talk that I gave of the concentration camp. And there's also some description of it in the book written about the 104th Infantry Division. There's also a book written by a gentleman about our company commander, terrible Terry Allen. He was a good general. We all liked Terry. He was not favored by the big shots in Washington because Terry said what he wanted to say, and he drank a lot, and he did a lot for the soldiers. And he's the one who started the night fighting program, and we just loved Terry. I think there was a book here.
Don't worry about it.
Anyway, the author called me and wanted my thoughts on the black soldiers, so I contributed to his book. And I told him that they were good soldiers. We mingled with them with no problem. They accepted us, we accepted them, and it worked out fine. It just so happened that they had a white officer. They wouldn't allow a black officer, but the white officer was one of those who was killed. So that was really bad. We lost him.
Just hang on 1 second. You're doing so well. Do you feel okay?
Yeah. When you cross an open field and the German artillery is firing at you, it takes a little while for them to zero in on where you are. So the first part of your division gets across the field fairly safe. About a third of the way, they've got us zeroed in. So that's when it's bad. They got us zeroed in, and we have to run with our full field equipment, trying to run, carrying a machine gun. I was second gunner. I had to carry the gun. The gun was 32 pounds. The tripod is about 18 pounds. So my first gunner never got hit. So I was stuck carrying the machine gun. We made it across the field, but there's always the medics hollering out, "Medics, help!" Because the first part gets okay, but the last part gets the majority of the shells coming in. And it's just no fun. Many a times we were told, "Dig in, we're going to be here tonight." We start digging in, the word comes, "We're pulling out." So you just start pulling out. You don't know what's going on around you. The worst part is not knowing what's happening. They don't tell you. All you do is follow orders. If they say jump, you ask them how high. You don't question them. One of the difficulties of World War II was getting across the Rhine River. There was an anti-tank division that found a bridge at Remagen, a nice little town in Germany, and they went across the bridge. The 1st Infantry Division, the big red one, followed. Then the 104th Division came, and we went across the river, and it was really nice. The river was nice, but the bridge was continually being bombed. It didn't sink when they tried to blow it. The Germans tried to blow it, but for some reason it didn't go off. So the boat, it was a railroad bridge, I might add. So anyway, we got across the river, and we dug in, and we were heavily greeted with artillery fire. One of my buddies, unfortunately, had to have a bowel movement, and he left the foxhole. And he got up his shrapnel in his rear end, and he was screaming with pain. And we got him to the A station, which was a couple 100 feet away. You never leave the foxhole. You have a K ration box, and you cut the K ration box in half. you use the half to scoop up any debris and throw it out. Well, one time I took my K-ration box and I scooped up some poop and I let her fly. And somebody yelled, "Who was the SOB that threw that?" Well, I didn't say anything. But these are the things that happen, strange things. There's a lot of laughs in the Army. You have to be humorous or you'll never make it. If you can't laugh at the jokes. There was one time we were in a little farmyard and a young German girl came up to one of the GIs and was talking, smiling, and the guy and her grandfather came over and whacked her and said, "You get back there." Well, that made us mad. That really made us mad. So we made the grandfather stand up against the barn and we fired a couple of pistols near him just to scare him. We told him, never, never hit your granddaughter. But that's the way. There was a lot of there's a lot of good guys in the Army too. They weren't all mean and ornery. The American soldiers were pretty good about. When we found out the SS ran all the concentration camps, from that point on, we didn't really give a darn about the SS. If they had the SS insignia, we'd shoot them. The Wehrmacht, we didn't. They were the regular soldiers. And there's a big difference.
Tell me more about your interactions with the SS.
Well, my first reaction with the SS was at the concentration camp.
No, tell me more about fighting the SS. Could you please tell me more about fighting the SS soldiers?
Well, you don't know they're SS unless you get close enough to see the little insignia on there. So that wasn't a big issue. We didn't see. We couldn't always see what they were. The SS had special little insignia on there. So the SS would not take prisoners. They would kill everybody, the German soldiers and the Americans. They were cruel. They were the bad guys. And if you read a lot about the history, you'll realize that it was the SS. Hitler had his own private army. There's quite a story behind that, but it's all in the books. So all I can say is it was a good experience for me and many others. I'm glad I had the experience. It taught me a little bit more about life and how to accept and live life. All we wanted was some peace. Well, I feel sorry for the Russian people. They suffered terribly. The civilian people, it's a shame that we have to have these wars. It's the civilian people who suffer terribly. I read a lot of books about the Polish people, the Jewish people. What a terrible way to live, all because some power-seeking dictator wants to take more land.
Could you tell me about some of your experiences using grenades?
You know, I don't think I threw more than a dozen grenades in the war. As a machine gunner, my job was to provide fire for the riflemen. The riflemen would be going ahead. Our job was to fire ahead of them, give them safe fire. So I wasn't that close to the enemy troops. The only time we used the grenades was when we were taking a village and we had to go through house by house.
Tell me about going house to house. Were there times that you found Germans in the house?
We could go into a house. Sometimes we would throw a grenade in and just holler, raus mit 'em, schnell. That means come out now. If they didn't come out, we'd throw another grenade in. That's about the way it worked. A lot of them surrendered. But when you say raus mit 'em, that means come out now. And some did, some didn't. I never had any bad experiences with a grenade. I did mention that we went into that small house where that gentleman was probably dying. But, well, generally, a machine gunner provides support for the rifleman. So if the enemy was in front of you, you would fire in the direction of the enemy. If they were in a patch of woods, that was always the problem. You couldn't see them too well, but you still fired ahead in hopes that the infantry would advance without too much competition. Now the Germans had a lot of bombs that would explode above a tree, and those bombs would throw tree branches down on top of the GIs. And so you didn't want to be in a patch of woods when you were being bombarded by artillery. That's pretty scary. Our machine gun was a .30 caliber machine gun, air-cooled. It weighed about 32 pounds. The first gunner carries the tripod. The second gunner was me. I carried the machine gun. I'm not very tall or big, but I managed to juggle that thing around. Sometimes we had a truck that would take us 10 or 15 miles. We didn't have to carry it, and that was a relief. But that machine gun, the first gunner usually fired it more than anyone else. The second gunner generally fed the ammo through the machine gun. So I didn't fire the machine gun very much. My buddy Dick did. He was the first gunner. And he didn't mind shooting anything. So my experience with the machine gun itself is really quite limited. Only 2 or 3 times where I took over.
And tell me about those 2 or 3 times. What was the circumstance?
Well, we were attacking a village, and we had pretty strong opposition. They had mortars, we had mortars. They had machine guns, we had machine guns. We were just shooting each other by the hour. The worst part was we didn't know what's going on around us. That's the scary part. You have no idea what's going on or what's going to happen the next day. You wonder, am I going to live today? Is tomorrow my last day? You don't know. You think about that.
What is that like to be 20 years old, not knowing if
well,
you're going to live?
For me, I didn't much care. I had no wife, I had no job, I had no girlfriend, I had no reason to come back. My lieutenant, who was killed, had a wife, 2 kids, and a small business. And I really felt terrible. I just really felt terrible. Why him? Why not me? Because I had nothing to come back for. I was free, no responsibility. My only thought was, am I going to survive this next battle? I wasn't scared or worried so much, but I thought about it a lot. You're sitting in a foxhole with your buddy, and you talk about what's it like when you get back home. And you think about all good things at home like milkshakes and hamburgers and sitting in a foxhole, freezing half to death. That's where I had my first cigarette, and that was a downfall. We got free cigarettes in every K ration box. Every K ration had 4 cigarettes, and Lucky Strike sent thousands of boxes of cigarettes to the GIs. LSMFT, Lucky Strike means fine tobacco, and we all got, not all of us, but many of us got the habit. And as you can see right now when I'm breathing, I'm having a little bit of difficulty, and that's some of the darn coffin nails, which I call cigarettes. So as a warning to everybody listening, don't start smoking, please. It's just bad for you. And I think that's the same with vaping. Don't start stuff like that. It's only going to shorten your life, and it's expensive, and you don't need it.
Amen.
There is a story going around that one of our patrols went out, and one of the guys came back completely shattered, blood all over him. And what the heck happened to you? Well, he said, I met a German soldier, and I said, Hitler's a bum. He said, Roosevelt's a bum. And we were in the middle of the road shaking hands, and a truck ran over us. That's just a little World War II joke, but I did not have to go on patrols.
Can you please tell me about the living conditions on the front lines? What were the living conditions like? How did you sleep? How did you eat?
That depended on where you were. We had, I would say that most of our evenings were spent in barns, not in foxholes. I would say that I spent probably no more than 30 days in a foxhole, but I spent a lot of days in beat up, half burned out barns with hay. Anytime we could find a house, we would take that house and try to get a good night's sleep. Sometime we found one beautiful home, some rich person. That was nice. But we tried not to get into the foxholes. We tried to find some place we could plop down and try to get a night's sleep. And then usually a barn would work. And we would sometimes run across civilians in the house, and we would ask them, haben Sie Eier? Have you got any eggs? We'd like to have an egg. Haben Sie Kartoffel? Do you have any potatoes? Our K rations were not too good. Several of our boys got yellow jaundice from eating K rations. My sergeant missed the last month of the war because of the illness caused by the K rations. Well, I believe the closest we got to the enemy were in some of these small towns where we would get the first 2 or 3 houses, and we didn't know the Germans were still there, and they were firing at us from houses, from second floors and attics, and we just had to go inch by inch. The riflemen had the hardest job. We tried to support the riflemen with our machine guns, but we couldn't always tell where the enemy was. The riflemen were the ones that had to go house by house with their M1 rifles. The machine guns were supportive. We did manage to get several hundred surrender on one location, and that was a little bit exciting. We had no idea there was that many in this area, and the riflemen went ahead. We gave them support. We were probably 300 feet from the enemy at that time, because the riflemen were in front. and we're trying to help them by firing ahead of them. So
How would you feed the ammunition in the machine gun? How did you feed the ammunition? You just hold it up, or do you?
well, there are 250 rounds in a box, and once you get you put the ammo in the machine gun, you just want to guide it so it doesn't jam. Sometimes the machine gun barrel gets so hot it fails to work. So you got to take it a little easy. You don't want to try to fire 250 rounds too fast. So you have to feed it, make sure the bullets are feeding through the machine gun. And that was primarily what I did. One of the first experiences I had in combat was very frightening. We were being heavily shelled by artillery, and our Company G was dug in, and we felt that as long as we're in a foxhole, we're pretty safe. And generally, you are. If you can get below ground and the shells land near you, you can survive. You may get concussion if they land too close, and that affects your hearing for a while, but at least you're alive. But in this particular case, we were heavily shelled, and one of my buddies in a nearby foxhole took a direct hit, and I was amazed. Half of his foot and his rifle butt landed on top of me. And that really scared me, because I knew that he was killed instantly. And that's frightening, especially when you're first introduced to combat. It's a scary situation. But fortunately, there weren't too many others who got the direct hit. But generally, I feel comfortable in a foxhole. If you're lying below, and if you're below in a forest, it's especially dangerous because falling tree branches. The Germans had weapons that would fire above tree level, and that would bring down all this debris, and that was bad. So we tried not to dig in wooded areas. Germany has a lot of small wooded areas. It's very beautiful. It's a nice country, but it wasn't much fun at that time.
That was an amazing answer. That was an incredible answer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Mr. Devaux, could you tell me, you told me the story about the minefield when the flare went up. Did you have any other experiences with mines or booby traps?
Well, no booby traps. We were told to be very careful. And the Germans did have booby traps, but fortunately I never knew of anyone who was killed by them. Sometimes they would put a picture on the wall and they would put it crooked, and you go to straighten it, but I never saw that. Those were in the movies. They're not real life.
Did you have any other experiences with mines or just that one?
Well, we had several minefields to cross. In fact, most minefields were labeled Achtung, Minen, attention, mines. So we were warned in advance that there were mines. And that was a tough job for those guys that had to go through the minefield and clear an opening for us. That was tough. I didn't have to worry about that, thank goodness. But mines, they had a mine called shoe mine, and the purpose of that mine was to blow off your foot. They didn't want to kill you. They wanted two guys to take care of you. So if you got step on a shoe mine, there are three guys that are out of the war. The guy with the foot and two other guys to help him. The Germans are pretty clever.
Absolutely.
And the Russian soldiers, they were something else too. Those guys, The women, oh my God, I would not have wanted many, pardon me, I would not want to have many, I would not want to have any closeness with those gals. They were big, tough, and mean. I couldn't believe it. That's not like the Russian women I see on the computer. But the soldiers were very tough. They drank a lot of vodka, always drunk. One of them got on a motorcycle and ran into a brick wall, full speed. Got off the motorcycle, blood all over, drinking vodka. I mean, I'm glad they weren't our enemy. I'm thankful for that. Well, yes. Not too many times, but I have seen some of our guys get hit. And that's scary. When your friend gets a bullet, you don't know whether it's fatal or not, and you holler, so-and-so got hit. Get a medic as soon as you can. And sometimes they would survive, sometimes they wouldn't. It's heartbreaking when they die in your arms or near you. It's sad. You just terribly, and especially if it's a close friend. And we were close. There was you may have heard of the ASTP program. Well, that was canceled, and several thousand college boys were shuffled into the infantry. Fortunately, we had about a third of our company was ASTP guys, and they were college guys, and they were very good soldiers. We got along famously. We also had 2 or 3 from the South, Mississippi, Kentucky, who couldn't read or write too well, and we were asked to write home to their parents, tell them things were okay. But I was fortunate to have made some ASTP friends, and we have been in contact over the years.
Just take a breather.
Well, after we have been shelled, there's always a few bodies lying around. Some of them yelling for medics. Some of the medics would say, well, this guy is too far gone, we can't help him. Some of the guys would die, and the last thing they would say would be, Mama, Mama. They wanted their mama when they died. And that impressed me. That's the last thing they would say.
You heard that?
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
Oh, that's bad. That's bad. That's bad. You hate to see anybody in your outfit killed. We were all very close. We had a lot of meetings about that during our reunions, about instances where we lost buddies, and it hurts. It hurts. We know of buddies that had children and that they would never see them again, and there was guys like me who had nothing to come home to.
Do you remember the names of anyone who was killed from your company?
Say that again.
Do you remember the names of anyone that was killed from your company?
Sure, I remember our lieutenant in charge of the mortars and machine gun was George Bowman, Bohman. Another lieutenant who was killed of the black patrol we had. He had a rather strange name. It was Armand J. Serraleno, Serral, Serraleno. Anyway, he was Hispanic, and and he was a good guy. But we had several GIs that were close friends. One from Bellingham, Washington, another from Friday Harbor, where my daughter lives. And he was in my outfit. We lost him. and I didn't know him too well, but it's just bad when you lose your friends. And we don't know all of the riflemen. Being in the machine gun and mortar squad, we had our own private group. The riflemen had their own group, but we mixed with them constantly, and I had a good relationship with many of the riflemen. In fact, it was the rifleman who found my address and invited me to the reunion, which was in Seattle. And that was a long time after I retired. We said it was a 5-day program. Every reunion was 5 days. And we would travel around the area, see all the sights, and then have a foxhole at night. We'd sit around tables and tell lies.
You are a very eloquent speaker. Your stories that you are telling are very powerful.
If it wasn't for my breathing, it'd be easier. But,
you're doing so well. We're almost done. I want to wrap it up with a couple questions.
When you go on the attack, and the attack is over, you look around and see what damage was done to your own troops, and how many enemy you might have killed. And when you say, who's that? They got a blanket over them. You don't always know who they are. And when you pull a blanket over them and you see it's a friend, then you start feeling bad. We feel that we're brothers from other mothers. That's our feeling. We will do what we can to protect each other. If there's I'm embarrassed to say this, but if a German threw a grenade and it landed over there and there were several GIs around, one of them would jump on that grenade. I don't know whether I would or not. It's a snap decision. You don't want to see your 3 or 4 guys get killed, so you flop on top of the grenade. Sometimes they go off, sometimes they don't. There's a lot of duds. And when I first joined the outfit, there was shells in the ground. And I was kind of kicking them. So don't do that, don't do that. He says, they can still go off. But I was kind of fat, dumb, and happy.
Did you ever provide first aid to any of the wounded men?
No.
What do you remember about the destruction to the German towns?
The destruction?
To the German towns and cities?
Oh gosh, we took the city of Cologne, Germany. All the bridges across the Rhine were demolished. The entire city was demolished except for the cathedral, the big, huge cathedral. And there's a picture of it, I think, in the file that I gave you. That was protected by all the air forces. They were asked to please not destroy the cathedral. Well, we went back in 1986, and the cathedral had suffered some window damage, but the building itself was not destroyed. But all around the building were brand new buildings that were built after the war. And it seems strange because the beautiful architecture of some of the German cities were completely demolished and rebuilt with modern technology, which wasn't as pleasant to look at.
Thank you for sharing that. You told me the story of the German sniper who was later killed. Do you have any other stories about German snipers?
I can't recall any story where I was personally involved.
That's okay.
With a German sniper. They were very good. All I know is they were very good and they killed a lot of Americans.
So you told me that that one German sniper they captured and they killed him. So were there any other times that you saw prisoners not being taken, or was that the only time you saw that?
That was the only time I saw that. Yeah. I never saw too much mistreatment by the GIs to the Germans. I never saw a lot of that.
And the lieutenant that was killed, was that Lieutenant Bowman?
Yeah.
Tell us about him. What kind of man was he?
Well, it's very strange. The mortars are about 400 feet behind the machine guns. And Lieutenant Bowman was always hanging around with the mortar squad. He never came up to the front lines very often. And we were a little disappointed because we very rarely saw him because he hung out at the rear. Well, we tangled a couple times. I went into a house one time and there was something in the oven cooking. And I opened the oven door and there was some really warm biscuits. And they looked so tempting, so the civilians had left. So I grabbed the biscuits and I shoved them in my coat. And I went back, and Lieutenant Bowman was there, and he says, I want to warn you guys, do not eat German food. There's not enough for them. Don't eat their food. Well, me and my humorous, I pulled out a roll. I said, how about this, Lieutenant? I said, I just found an oven full. You are going to be court-martialed. He was very upset. Well, I said, oh, come on. You know, what goes on? Well, he got killed, so that ended that. But I got to tell you one more story that it's not about the war so much. When I was at Camp San Luis Obispo, they disbanded the 104th Division. And I was put in a military police outfit that was being shipped to Fort Lewis. The reason I was being shipped was to get my discharge. Well, I came up here in about September, waiting for my discharge. And I had nothing to do from September through December except help deliver mail. They wanted GIs to help deliver mail. So I signed up for that. Well, here comes New Year's Eve, and I'm from Tacoma, and I want to go in town and celebrate with my buddies from high school. I get the notification, Joe Devaux, you're on guard duty on Highway 99. That's where all the trucks are lined up. I said, come on, the war is over. What's going on? Well, all the MPs are busy, and we need somebody to pull guard duty. So I said, okay. Well, it was terrible weather. The rain was coming down in torrents. So I got in the cab of a truck, and I was sitting there kind of half dozed off. Next thing I know, there's a knock on the door. You're under arrest. What are you talking about? Well, you shouldn't be sleeping on guard duty. I said, come on, the war's over. Well, you report to the company commander tomorrow morning. So I did, with my uniform on. He says, I'm going to make an example of you guys. Just because you come back from overseas, you think you can run the army, but you can't. You're going to be court-martialed. And I said, oh, come on. So I did something that everybody always kids about. I went to the chaplain, and I told the chaplain, now this was January 2nd. I told the chaplain my story. He said, well, let me talk to the company commander. So the company commander and him had a conversation. And I was given 6 days hard labor, shoveling coal from there to there, and it was snowing. Well, on January 5th, they called me in and said, "Your discharge papers are ready. Do you want to join the reserves?" I said, "No, thank you. I've had enough of the Army." And so on January 6th, I got my discharge. But the last 4 days in the Army were not very pleasant. And that's why I didn't go in the reserves. Had I gone, I would have ended up in Korea. So I made the right decision. But I feel my Army career was beneficial. I really do. Had I not gone overseas, I wouldn't have known what war is really like. War is hell, and you don't forget. You try, but I don't talk about it to anybody else. Nobody cares. They have their own life to live. And so I just keep it inside. And I read a lot, and I learn more every day about what's going on in the world. And I'm very upset the way things are going right now. But nothing I can do about it.
That was very beautiful. That was very well spoken. I appreciate you sharing that.
So, Mr. Devaux, take us through about the war ending. How do you get back home? Well, first, how did you hear about the German surrender? What were you doing when the Germans gave up?
Well, when I came home from the Army, I was amazed to see so many German prisoners of war waiting on us at the various forts. And they were good soldiers. They had surrendered. I had no problem with any of them. We teased them a little bit about their girls, but they were okay. I would say that when you see something that isn't right, do not be afraid to speak out. When you see anti-Semitism on any race, especially the Jews and the Asians, speak out. Don't let this terrible thing ever happen again. And I see it coming if we're not especially careful. I think we should all turn to God and ask for peace for everybody. It's not the population. They suffered miserably during the war. The Russian people, oh my God, how they suffered. And the Polish, and the Jewish, and all of them. And it's not because they wanted war, it's because their crazy leaders wanted war. And I'm seeing that happening right now again. I just hope that common sense takes over. And I just hope that someday we won't have to have these wars. Of course, we have to have a reduction in population, but not through wars.
What can future generations do to make you feel like the sacrifice you and your comrades made was worth it?
My feeling is that they should use common sense. They just have to try to understand what is going on in the world and speak out when something isn't right. It's a serious problem, and I don't know what I can recommend at age 99. So place your heart in the hands of the Lord and hope that might help. It's really difficult.
Absolutely. I'm going over what you wrote. Could you please tell me a little bit about the cold? How did you survive the cold in the winter?
Oh, God. We never had overcoats at the beginning. We just had field jackets, and we had wool caps, and it was cold. It was one of the coldest records on history in 1944. And when you sit in a foxhole, my teeth rattled so hard, I had splitting headaches, and it was the cigarette that finally calmed me down. But miserable, cold. You just can't get warm. You can build a fire in a barrel and get warm for 10 minutes, but you walk 20 feet away and you're freezing cold again. That's why I chose cremation. I don't want to die in the cold.
That's the reason.
Well, one of the reasons I care about that, but I don't like cold.
When did you actually get into combat for the first time? What month was it? Because you joined them after the Bulge, right?
It was before I joined the 104th, and I did not belong to any outfit. We were almost overrun by the Germans, and we were given rifles and told to dig in. So that was my first experience. I didn't fire the M1 at that time. I hung around that area until I was assigned to the 104th, and that was in January. And my first actual combat was February 23rd when we crossed the Roar River. Our job was to take the marshalling yards, the railroad yards of the city of Durham, D-U-R-E-M.
And tell me about the crossing of the river. What was that like?
Well, they flooded the dam. They bombed the dam out, so we had to cross in rubber boats. And the current was pretty bad, but we made it across. We had quite a bit of a problem with German soldiers. We had every marshalling yards has a small shed where the workers go in and have a cup of coffee or whatever. And there was a German in there that had been wounded in the stomach, really quite bad. And he was pleading, "Vasa, Vasa, please give me water." And one of my buddies said, "Give the guy some water." And then he said, don't do that. It'll kill him." He said, "I don't give a darn. I'm tired of his moaning." So we threw the canteen over to him and let the German drink it down. He probably died, I don't know. But those are small stories. But
Those small stories are the most personal. Those are the ones people are interested in. Do you remember the first time you saw a German casualty? The first time you saw a dead German?
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, when I first joined the Timberwolves, my sergeant, I said, was about 37 years old. He was a really gentleman. He said, have you seen your first dead German? I said, no. He said, well, come on over here. So he took me over there to a little area, and there was a dead German soldier in there, half eaten alive by birds and stuff. He said, there's your first German soldier. So I looked at it. I said, oh, yeah, I don't like that. But that was the first time he wanted me to see one before I might have killed one. So that was my first time I saw a German dead, which he showed me.
When you went to Nordhausen, is this what you saw? You saw that?
Yeah.
It's just like that.
So,
Can you hold that up to the camera, please?
General Eisenhower wanted everybody within 100 miles to see this. We're looking at a concentration camp. The concentration camp was right near the town of Nordhausen. The population denied knowing about the concentration camp, but they knew what was going on. And after it was liberated, the army forced the civilians of the city of Nordhausen to help bury the dead who were lying around. And there were many hundreds. And they were forced to dig graves for all the dead people, the civilians.
It was pretty bad. And as I said before, it's not only the pictures you see of the Holocaust, it's the smell and the sound, and the burning ovens, and the horrific treatment the Germans did to the people. They took everything out of their mouths. They took all their teeth out. They took their hair and made lampshades. I mean, the Germans, SS, were terrible. And the most cruel were the women who ran the SS camps. They were more cruel than the men. And that's a shame.
Thank you for sharing that. Mr. Devaux, you are a young American soldier, and you walk into this atrocity. What did that do? How did you comprehend what you were seeing?
Well, I was in shock, of course. You must remember I was not in combat as long as many, many thousands of other soldiers were. I was only in combat about 120 days. Some of these guys were in combat for 5 years, and they suffered. So I was fortunate in that I only had a limited time, even though it was bad at times, and you wondered if you would survive. You were lucky to survive. I consider myself very fortunate.
Thank you for sharing that. But when you walked into the concentration camp, what was that like for you? Did you have any idea of what the Germans were doing before you went?
No. That was a surprise. We hadn't really been told anything about the concentration camps. That was kind of a secret. I don't think our government wanted us to know too much. They hid a lot of stuff from us. A lot of battles we lost. The market garden was a bad situation. The Hürtgen forest was a terrible situation. We should not have been involved in the Hürtgen forest. I consider myself fortunate to have missed that battle.
When you went into the concentration camp, did any of the survivors come up to you?
No. The medics took care of them. The ones that were alive were just skin and bones. You wondered if they could survive the day. The medics were only allowed to give them some liquids to try to keep them alive for a few days before they could feed them anything solid. I don't know what they did. All I know is they were told, don't feed them because it'll kill them. Well, the smell of burning flesh isn't very pleasant. In fact, when the people from Nordhausen came to look at the camp, most of them were wearing masks because of the smell. It was very bad.
Could you please tell me, how did you hear about the end of the war when the Germans surrendered?
We were in a little town about 15 miles from the Russian front. The town was called Bitterfeld, and we stayed at a lady's house. She had a son named Gunther. Her name was Hilda Heistermann. I remember that distinctly. The machine gun squad stayed in her house, and she was a very pleasant lady. Her husband had been killed on the Russian front, and we felt sorry for her. When we were told that we're moving up, the Germans are going to have one final battle, so we're going to have one more battle. But we didn't. It was the Russians, so we didn't have to have that battle. Well, we felt sorry for Hilda, so we started gathering supplies for her, food and stuff, because we knew that she was going to have a tough time. She said, no, people will think I slept with you. Well, she didn't. None of us were that interested in her. She was an old lady, 35 maybe, So we left Bitterfeld, and we went about 10 miles, and they said the war was over. Well, we just really had a great time there. But I remember the town. Now, the worst part about this is that the town of Bitterfeld and 700 miles west was given to the Russians on an agreement at Yalta. I think that was Yalta. So we gave back a lot of ground that we fought for just because of political decisions by Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. Stalin always felt we didn't treat them right. He wanted a second front so bad, and I don't blame him. But we could not do a second front at that time. So it all boiled down to politics, and it really upset me when I found out that the Yalta Conference gave a lot of ground that we lost troops in back to Russia. Oh, one more story.
Okay.
We took a town in Germany. I can't recall the name, but there was a hospital in the town. And as we went through the hospital, it was full of wounded soldiers, not only Germans, but there were some Russians and some French, and there were some various branches of the military. And as we strolled down the hall, we were asking, anybody here speak English? And there was a German officer who spoke up, and he said, I speak English. And we talked a little bit, and he said, you guys, Germany is not your enemy. Russia is your enemy, and you're going to find out damn soon. And he was exactly right. We have tried for 70 years to get along with the Russians. We just cannot seem to agree on anything. And his comment reminded me of what General Patton hated the Russians. He wanted to attack the Russians at the end of the war, but sober minds held him at bay. But that lieutenant, the German, spoke English very well, and he was right.
Thank you for sharing that.
All I can say is if you are called to serve for your country, do it. But follow orders. Do what you're told. Don't ask questions. You'll get along just fine. That's about it.
So, Mr. Devaux, after the war was over in Germany, did you do occupation duty?
Did I?
Did you do occupation duty?
No, we didn't. We hung around. The war ended in May. We came back in July. In April, we had some training exercises. And unfortunately, one of our machine guns killed a rifleman who was advancing forward. Well, that stopped the exercise, and officers came over and looked through each of our machine guns. We had 2 machine guns, and they could not determine which machine gun had killed that soldier. And I felt terrible because some mother and dad are going to get a letter saying that their son was killed in the final battle. But it was a mistake. by one of our machine guns. And that is so sad. That really bothered me for a long time.
Thank you for sharing that. Tell me the story. How did you come home?
Well, yeah, sometime around June 15th, I think, we were put on trucks and shipped to the coast. I think it was called Camp Lucky Strike, but I'm not sure. And we were boarded aboard a United States Matson liner called the USS Monterey, a really deluxe ship. There were thousands of us on that ship, and there were a lot of gambling going on. The minute we got on board, the dice games started and card games, and we had a very pleasant trip home. We had to eat in different sections. There were so many of us, but we managed to have our meals and enjoy our cruise home. It was just wonderful, but we didn't know what we were coming home to. We were all a little bit nervous how we would be accepted, but for the most part, we were greeted very famously, very happily. So.
Did you see the Statue of Liberty?
Yes, we saw it leaving, and we kind of wondered if we'd see it again, but we saw it again, and it was welcome. Yeah.
And so after you come to the East Coast, how do you get back to Tacoma? And tell me about seeing your mom and dad for the first time, please.
Well, I headed for the ice cream parlor that I used to hang out with, and nobody was there. They were all down at the tavern at 9th and Broadway. So I went down there and met some of the old high school buddies. They didn't realize that I had been overseas, and we had quite a session. But I got involved with some pretty bad guys over there, and I decided I didn't want to live over there anymore. I just didn't feel I wanted to live there, so I moved to Seattle into the YMCA, and I lived there at the Y for 2 years. And one day I worked for the city of Seattle lighting department, and my job was 1 block away from the YMCA. Well, a lady I work with said, "I know a girl you might like. Her name is Helen Daly, and she goes to that church up on the hill. They have a Sunday night gathering." So I wandered up there one Sunday evening, and lo and behold, I saw her. And I said, "My God, that's for me." And it took me about 6 months to convince her. I proposed to her on Valentine's Day, and come July 9th, 75 years with the same woman, and she's been a wonderful wife. And that's all I ever wanted when I came out of the war, was to get a job, have a wonderful wife, make a family, try to enjoy the remaining years. And I would say that's been accomplished.
That was beautiful.
When I left Fort Lewis, I had a huge bag on my shoulder, and I hitchhiked from Fort Lewis into Seattle. Well, I got to what they call First Avenue, and I told the gentleman I'd like to get off here because I'm going in another direction. So I stuck my tongue out, and another fellow picked me up. He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Malachi Avenue." He said, "I'll take you right there, no problem." So he took me there, and I had this big barracks bag. My folks didn't really know when I was coming, so it was a surprise. So I got off the guy. The guy gave me a nice ride. I knocked on their door, and my mom almost fainted. My dad grabbed me, shook my hand. I gave him a carton of cigarettes. He was smoking then. You know, I had brought home a couple of cartons, and we had a nice reunion. Well, I stayed with them. They had an extra room in their apartment. So I stayed with them about 2 or 3 months. And they started pushing me to get a job. And I said, you know, I'd just like to have a couple of 3 months to relax. Well, we think you should be looking for a job. So that's when I moved out into the YMCA. I stayed with them for a little while, but we weren't getting along. My mother and I never really got along very well. She was very strict. My dad was much more lenient, and we were buddies. We were pals. But my mom was really hard to live with. But in 1998, when my dad died, my mother moved into Wesley Homes. She was living in Hawaii, and I convinced her she ought to move here. So she did, and she lived to be 101. And we got along really well the last 4 or 5 years. So that was a blessing.
Absolutely. Tell me, Mr. Devaux, when you first came home, did you have difficulties readjusting to civilian life? Did you have nightmares? Did loud noises bother you?
I had no trouble adjusting, but I did have nightmares. And my wife will tell you that many a night she woke me up. I was sweating and hollering. Many a night she woke me up. And that was after 1948. So, but adjusting to life was not a problem. But sleeping was a problem. That's where I had some problems. But I haven't had any the last 50 years. My mouth is going on.
You have so much wisdom up in your head. Is this the most you've ever talked about the war?
By all means. That's why things. That's why. Pardon me. That's why things pop up. Well, the advice I would give anybody is what I heard in a movie years ago with Henry Fonda. It was called The Grapes of Wrath. And he was told, when you see something wrong, do something about it. Don't just watch and wait. Try to get involved to stop what's going on if it's not right. And I think that's good advice to give anybody. When you see something that's not right, you tell them, I don't think you should do that. You know, I think you should think about what you're doing. Don't make quick adjustments, quick decisions. Think about what you're going to do. Think about your answer or response to a question.
I'm the same age that you were when you were overseas. Roughly. I'm a little bit older now. But I have a lot of respect for you. I like to see how you are such a friendly man. I call you on the phone and you welcome me to your home.
Yeah.
You've shared your stories with me. You try to please everyone. You're that type of person that likes to help people.
Yeah.
And I really respect that.
Well, thank you.
Is there any advice you would give me as a young man that, based on what you have lived through, the war, the depression?
Well, what's your objection? What do you want to do with your life?
I want to interview as many World War II veterans as possible. I want to make the world a better place. I want to help people. But I value your opinion.
That's certainly admirable, and I think that's what most people should try to do. This is a Methodist facility, although we have all kinds of religions here Presbyterians and all. But we came here because we grew up in our church downtown Seattle where we met. And we had 19 people move here. We all had no divorces. Imagine, there were at least 12 couples, no divorce. None of my kids, I got 3 grandchildren. I tell them all the time, please don't say mean, cruel things to your mate. You can't wash that away. When you say a cruel, mean thing, it stays in their heart, and you can't wash it away. So think before you speak. Be positive. You're going to have arguments, but don't go to bed at night without that hug. And don't wake up in the morning without that hug. I think that's important. And we have 75 years together. So treat everybody like you would want to be treated. Ask yourself, how would Jesus handle this problem? That might be one solution. Don't give up when you feel down and out. There's ways to help you. Look up those ways. There's all kinds of help you can get if you need it. Don't get involved in drugs of any kind. Don't start smoking. The cleaner life you live, the happier you will be, and the longer you will live.
Can you talk a little bit about your faith?
Well, I wasn't very religious when I was a kid. I didn't go to church. In fact, I wasn't baptized until after I met Helen. But when I was in a foxhole, believe it or not, you're all alone. You talk to God. You don't know whether He hears you or not, but you think about it, and you may get an answer to calm you. Not a verbal answer, but just something comes down and calms you down a little bit. And I think that's the start. When I met Helen, I'll tell you one more quick story. Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
That might be important.
I'm sorry. I hung it. Do you want me to call them? It's the front desk.
Huh?
Hi, did you try calling Joe Devaux' room? Okay. Oh, were you here earlier? Oh, I'm sorry. Did you stay? Okay. Do you need to come back? Okay, if you don't mind, can I? Are you able to help him with his oxygen machine by chance? You know how to do that? That would be very helpful because he really needs that and he doesn't know how to do it. But hang on, let me go ask him what time and I'll tell you if you hang on one sec. It's that nice lady. Remember the lady that came?
Yeah.
She's downstairs.
Fine, send her. Well,
No, all she wants to know is what time tomorrow can she come?
anytime. Anytime that's convenient for her.
Okay, he said any time that's convenient.
I'm not going anywhere.
He'll be here. What time? So I told him. She will be here around 9:30 to
Fine.
9:45. But please, Jessica, you're very nice. But please do help him with that oxygen thing, because I'm trying and I don't. And he really needs some expertise. Thank you. You drive safe, okay? Bye.
Thank you. I took care of that.
I told her about the oxygen.
Yeah,
She said she's gonna look at it, and she thinks she knows how to do it.
good.
But if she doesn't, she's gonna call the people from the company, and they will come.
Fair enough. Now,
You were telling all this life advice. You were talking about. Oh, I was asking you about your faith.
oh yeah, I was talking to my dad one night, and I said, you know, I really love Helen, but she's so involved in the church. She's in the choir. She's in charge of our social activities. And my dad said, well, you knew that when you married her, so you got to go along with it. Well, he was right. It turned out to be a successful, happy marriage. And I place a lot of that on God's and our church. Without that, I don't know what I would have turned out. I might have turned out, met some gal and had a terrible romance and broke up, and who knows. So.
And you know, you mentioned earlier that, you know, when you're in the foxhole, you pray to God, but you don't know what happens. It looks like He's answered your prayers.
Yeah.
I'm saying God has answered your prayers.
Yeah.
You survived the war.
Well, he relieved my mind. He calmed me down, which helped.
You know, can you tell me a little bit? You just got out of the hospital. You have this COPD. You have a hard time breathing.
Oh, God.
I called you on the phone, and you were so agreeable.
I got to tell you something. There was a 7-hour period when I couldn't breathe, swallow, or stop coughing. And I prayed to God, please, please let me die. I did. I just wanted to die so bad. But He, in His infinite wisdom, wouldn't let me. But I was really sick, really sick. And under the hospice program, I have a choice of where I want to die. I want to die right here. I don't want to die in the hospital. I hate hospitals. Oh, God, how I hate them. They tie you down. I was in there 2 days. I had leg cramps, foot cramps. I couldn't turn over. I asked for a pill to put me to sleep. They gave me a melatonin, which isn't worth a darn. I was awake all night. They said, we're going to keep you here one more day. I said, oh, my God. No. But I stayed one more day. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I just hate hospitals. The nurses were good. A couple of them, pretty good.
I'm sure they were quite pretty. Are you afraid of death?
Not very well, no. I was going like this.
No, I said, are you afraid of death?
No. No, I'm not afraid to die. I want to go to that land where joy never ends. That's the way I look at it. I'm not afraid to die. If I were to die right now, I wouldn't mind.
No, don't do that.
I don't want to push you to the trouble.
Yeah, don't do.
But no, I'm not afraid of death.
But you said you do what you believe that there's a heaven of some kind.
Yeah, I would like to believe that Lord would accept me, and but I just never thought a lot about it, frankly. To me, death is an ending, and all my problems will be solved. I don't have to worry about my wife. I don't have to worry about paying the bills. All that's gone. I can live in peace and joy.
Do you mean that?
Yeah.
But you're such a nice person. You're such a positive guy.
Well, we all have different thoughts about death.
I'm afraid of it.
Well, you're young.
Even if I was your age, I would be afraid, I think.
It depends on your health. If you were healthy, yes. But if you get down to where I am now, you might be really relieved to know that all these problems are going to be solved. And you won't have to worry about them anymore. On our anniversary, I've asked for 2 things. Well, Helen is a teetotaler. She never had a drink in her life. When I first met her, I was asked to give a talk to the Swedish Businessmen's Club on the cancer drive. I went up to their meeting place, and the guy next to me was the president of the Bank of California. He said, aren't you having dinner? No, I'm just here for the talk. I'm going to meet my girlfriend and take her home after my talk. Oh, you got to have dinner. Set this man up for dinner. Well, that included 3 drinks. So I gave my talk, and it was okay. Then I walked down to the Y, and Helen was waiting for me, and she could smell my breath, and she gave me her engagement ring back. She said, I don't want nothing to do with you if you're going to drink. And I was shocked. I said, well, I'm not a drinker. But I said, if that's what you want, I swear I'll never drink. And I never did. Although now, I'll have a beer on occasion. But I never drank in all of our married life because I wanted her more than I wanted the booze. So.
You said for your anniversary you had 2 wishes.
January 9th.
You said you had 2 wishes on your anniversary.
Oh yeah, I'm going to ask for some fried oysters. I love fried oysters. If I get maybe 4 or 5. And when I used to be single, there was a drink called a whiskey sour. You ever had one of those? Well, it's been 75 years since I had one. And I felt the need for a whiskey sour, so they're going to bring some whiskey mix sour, and I'm going to have one of those.
Your kids are going to bring it?
They're going to have it down the hall in the dining room. There's a little area down the hall. If you go down the hall, as you see left, there's a dining.
You are such a special person, Mr. Devaux. I wanted to, before we wrap up, you know, you've had all these health complications. You've had a lot of health issues. But when I called you, you were so happy to do the interview. Why were you so agreeable?
Well, I think that the words of the veterans should be spread out so people know what really happened. It was, you know, the greatest generation. And a lot of people don't realize what we went through. When Pearl Harbor came, boy, everybody headed down for the enlistment. But that was very good. I don't know.
It's really an honor. It's an honor for me to talk to you. And I want you to know that because of what you went through in the war, people like me are alive. And that's something no one can ever take from you. You have helped more people, Mr. Devaux, than you will ever know.
Well, I hope so.
It's true. Little children get to dream about their lives 80 years from now, instead of worrying about whether or not their house will be bombed.
Well, I'm sure that you will.
Can you hold that? Tell us about that photo, please.
Well, we were in the city of Halle, Halle, quite a large city, about the size of Seattle. We made a deal with the mayor. We would not do any damage to the properties if they didn't fire upon us. And fortunately, we didn't have any competition from the German soldiers. We had a little, but not much. Well, the population of Halle did not leave. They pretty well stayed in their homes and in their apartments. And these 4 little girls were walking down the street, and I asked them if they would pose picture. They didn't know what I meant, but I said, "Haben Sie Kaugummi?" I give them some gum, Wrigley's gum, and they said they would stand by me by the picture taken. Well, one of my buddies took a picture. We didn't have any good camera equipment. It was cameras that we found as we went through the country. None of us had any good camera, but it came out fairly well, and I like that picture.
Absolutely. I don't think they're little girls anymore. can you tell us, for the record, Mr. Devaux, can you tell me what company and regiment and division were you in?
Yes. I served in the 104th Infantry Division, which was formed in Oregon in 1942. There are 3 regiments in a division. I was in the 413th Regiment, Company G, Weapons Platoon, which is the machine gun and mortar section. There are approximately 250 in a company, so I was very proud to be a member of Company George. Our motto was, "Let George do it."
What kind of man do you want people to always remember you as, Mr. Devaux?
Well, I would hope that anybody that knows me knows that I love life. I tried to do what I was asked to do during the war. I had no problem getting along with my officers. You do what you're told, you'll do all right. I'm glad I was served in the 104th Division. Had I not, I would not have known so many things about life. Some are pretty bad, but still, having never done it, you just never know. Now I know how horrible war is, and I think we should do whatever we can to just not have any more. So.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you want people to, you were a good father, a good husband.
Try to be. We never had any problems between us. We never had any money. We were during the Depression. I had to go out every morning in the garage and carry a bucket of fluid from the garage into the kitchen to pour it in the stove. That was our heating. It was bad. Finally, I got enough money to have a barrel put outside of the wall of my house and feed the oil in through a tube. I mean, things were tough, really tough.
But you persevered.
Yeah, because I had a good wife.
And she had a good husband. We are all done, Mr. Devaux. Thank you so much for your patience.
Well, I thank you, too. You put a lot of time in this.
I just want to make sure that people like you are not forgotten about.
Yeah.
And so this tape, this video, I'm going to put it together and I'm going to send it to you.
Fine.
And I'm going to make a point to get it to you very soon.
Yeah.
So that you can watch it.
Yeah, then I can forward it to my kids.
Exactly. Do I have permission, my nonprofit, Remember WWII, and our organizations that we work with, do we have permission to use your interview in its entirety?
I guess so, yeah. If you want.
Perfect. I just want to, it will always...
I hope my voice was adequate.
Your voice was perfect.
Okay.
We are all done.
Oh, that's me and Helen when we were young.
Yeah, hold that up to the camera for me, please. Hold that up to the camera, please. And could you? So this photo, that's a photo of you and Helen.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful photo.
In our 20s.
You look like you're really in love. Can I have this, or do you?
Which says thank you very much.
No. I know it's a lie. With the mustache, it's a little Hispanic. But I'm going to put everything back, and then I'll get out of your hair.
Help me up.
God bless you, Mr. Devaux.
Help me up. Oh, boy. Sitting down that long is a little hard.
You did such a good job.
Well, I appreciate that.
I'm going to...
Oh.
Mr. Devaux, just look at me and give me a big smile.
I got a lot of pictures on my computer.
And give me a big smile. So just turn it a little bit. Yep. And give me a big smile.
I'm not very steady.
That's okay. You're doing great. Just you'll look right at the camera and smile, please. How old were you in that photo? How old were you in that?
Yeah, well, I was 21. Yeah, 21.